took to Ukraine in September, I saw President Yushchenko and then the Prime Minister, Ms. Tymoshenko. And after we talked about many things, each privately took me aside and indicated about the 1st of January, Ukraine was going to be faced with a shock in terms of natural gas price increase. I remember Ms. Tymoshenko taking me to the map, suggesting pipelines that went to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan and various other places. And in due course, the United States and others might be able to work with Ukraine. But this was September, and they were talking about January. They were prophetic, and 3 days before January the 1st, as I recall, Russia announced that the price of natural gas would go up from $55 for certain units to $220, a 4 times increase, not gradually, but now. And essentially, Ms. Tymoshenko and President Yushchenko, as I recall, did not believe Russia would go so far as to really shut off the tap. But they miscalculated. Russia did go that far and shut off the tap. Now, what is my point? The new realism is just this. Russia didn't send any tanks across the borderline, nor troops, nor aircraft, no softening up of the situation. In the new realism, a new Russia and a new Ukraine could have a war in which Ukraine lost rapidly, in which the attrition was visible with regard to old people who die from lack of heat, and industry that was already only fledgling and getting going again simply stops. That I don't think is sunk in altogether in our country and around the world, but it's beginning to. The Russians defend this. Mr. Lavrov, when he came over, said, well, even if we did shut off the tap, we tried to force more gas through other lines that were coming through Ukraine because the old Soviet Union had all these lines, didn't discriminate boundaries at that time. But if you were the president of Poland, as he testified when he came over here, it was a sinking feeling watching the gauges go down in terms of pressure coming into Poland. The Germans protested 40% dependence on Russian natural gas. The Hungarians, 80% dependence on Russian natural gas. That this was really aggression against Europe and a very bad time for Vladimir Putin when he's taking the chairmanship of the G8 to be demonstrating this kind of view. But in any event, within 48 hours, a new deal was cooked up for Ukraine, $95, not $55. Some gas mixed in from Turkmenistan, a strange holding company in Switzerland managing it for at least 6 months of time, and things were sort of left in that heap. Just to make the point, Belarus was given a discount to 47. Now, I want to underline 2 factors about this. The old realism was the market works. Let the market work. Supply and demand will lead to changes in the kind of cars people buy, the general ways they handle energy. But essentially, the market will not work in this instance because maybe as much as 77% of all oil and natural gas and the reserves of same are really controlled by governments. These are not private oil companies, not Exxon Mobil or Chevron or somebody letting the price of supply and demand go up or down. Those folks are out of it. The pricing here was being done, if not by President Putin, by at least somebody very short just of the presidency there. And increasingly, that is the threat of others who do not have that kind of authority. Hugo Chavez, Venezuela, or the Iranians indicate, first of all, they might stop shipment, but clearly they could change the pricing of it. It will. So this is not a market function, and that is hard for many Americans to understand, but nevertheless, that's the way the world works presently. And secondly, given the fact that you can turn the spigot on and off, you can grossly affect the international relations, not only vis-a-vis bilateral situations, but whole continents. For example, when President Putin visits with the EU and suggests that if the EU is not very receptive to Russian deals with regard to oil or natural gas, the pipelines might go the other direction, to China, to Japan, someplace else. If you folks don't like it, tough. And here the Europeans are all talking in Great Britain. I saw in the paper today stringent measures to conserve energy, mandatory measures with regard to industry just to get through the winter in Great Britain. In Ukraine, extraordinary energy conservation measures taken, once again, pretty late. They were moving about the same pace we were, but they turned out were a lot more vulnerable, and using energy overall, according to some charts, at an inefficiency of 2 or 3 times as inefficient as we use energy in this country. So they have a long way to go, and they were a part of the old Soviet system in which energy was vastly wasted. Energy used in Russia, as a matter of fact, is not too short of what it is in Ukraine in terms of inefficiency. But I make these points because the new realism was that despite the fact that folks like ourselves today might be discussing alternative sources of energy, whether it be ethanol or gasohol or all the possibilities of cellulosic or biodiesel or hybrid cars, or eventually often in long blue hydrogen, and all sorts of thoughts about research and development that surely must be coming along at some point. That was the old realism, that somehow these are interesting things for intellectuals to bandy about. But real people use oil. That's the way, in fact, the world works. And you produce more of it, and you find more of it, and it's available at a certain price, and none of us thought the price might be that high. But at the same time, get real, people would say. This is the way the world works. Now, I think there's still a lot of that out there. I saw, for instance, in a Wall Street Journal editorial just this last Friday, it suggested to people like myself who drive Prius cars that we're perfectly free to do that, sort of as a virtue component or whatever it was called. But nevertheless, once again, get real. Safety requires heavy cars. If you want to save lives, the editorial said, you use heavy cars, not Priuses or people worrying about. And so the argument's hardly over. And as a matter of fact, one can make a case that the common sense of Americans is ambivalent about all of this. This leads then to strange situations in the politics of our country, widely commented on, not just by Tom, but by many editorial writers, that Republicans race to give $100 to every American who is inconvenienced, and Democrats go into price gouging and so forth. As if even the gougers, there are only 1/4 left of the market. If my thesis is right, they're not setting the price at the pump. And in any event, the gouging thing is bogus. Everybody knew it. But both parties, in an instant thing, don't really talk about the fundamentals, what's going to need to happen. But we're still very superficially hoping to score points at the margins. And the real work in the energy committees and so forth still gets bogged down over age-old theological arguments as to whether climate change is for real or whether, in fact, once again, a figment of somebody's intellectual imagination, which sets in motion a whole other set of things we're not talking about. Climate change more on the power side of the energy thing than the transportation, but both commingled in all sorts of ways, because coal might, in fact, be used to power transportation vehicles. The R&D on that still is out, but others are trying out for size natural gas as substitutes. We're all now, thank goodness, thinking in more practical terms. The new realism is to try to find out what resources we have, and I would just add, finally, it is dawning on people in this country that we are strategically vulnerable. And I don't want to set up today, once again, a theological debate as what is more important, the war on terrorism or the energy war. But there are a good many who would feel that the possibilities for devastation of countries, including our own, may come much more from our myopia in terms of energy policy than our ability to track down the last of the Al-Qaeda cells. And therefore, if really we look at it in those terms, why we ought to take it very seriously indeed.